Hi everybody, so today we're going to be talking about growth hormone, and there is a lot to growth hormone. So let's go ahead and get started. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to look at why do we have growth hormone and what does it do. So let's get started. And the first thing we're going to look at is, first of all, growth hormone plays a role in metabolism. Okay, so it's going to play a role in metabolism. It's going to cause an increase in cell size. Like the name implies, it's also going to cause an increase in growth, right? So it's going to be responsible for growth. It also is going to be responsible for differentiation of cells. All right, so we're going to get differentiation of cells, and then it's going to play a role in mitosis. Now, I am not going to go too much into mitosis in this video, but it does play a role in mitosis. But the other stuff, I'm going to try to kind of go in order to show how it does that, okay? So now, what causes the release of growth hormone? Well, there's actually two hormones that are going to control growth hormone. One is growth hormone releasing hormone, and the other one is going to be growth hormone inhibiting hormone. So we'll talk about the growth hormone inhibiting hormone later on, but we'll start with the growth hormone releasing hormone. Now, growth hormone releasing hormone is going to be secreted by two different nuclei. The first one we call the ventromedial nuclei, or the nucleus. And remember, nucleus is a bundle of cell bodies in the central nervous system. And then the second one is what we call the arcuate nucleus. Okay, so we're going to have the arcuate nucleus. So these two are going to secrete this growth hormone releasing hormone. Now, when do they secrete the growth hormone releasing hormone? Well, they'll do it in times of starvation, okay, especially if there's a big decrease in proteins in the blood. They're going to do it when someone's suffering from hypoglycemia. They're going to do it when there's an increase in amino acids, right? When there's an increase in amino acid, this is going to happen too. There's a hormone that's released from the stomach called ghrelin, and this is going to cause an increase in growth hormone releasing hormone also. So it's a hormone released from the stomach just before you're about to eat. We can get this in times of excitement. We can also have it when we exercise, right? If there's trauma, it may cause an increase in this. And then it can also have an increase 2 hours into deep sleep. Okay, so you have deep sleep, and then all of a sudden it's going to be released about 2 hours later. Other hormones that can cause it to be released are the catecholamines, serotonin, and dopamine. So now let's take a look of what's going to happen here. So let's say one of these things happen here, and these nuclei secrete the growth hormone releasing hormone. Now, if you recall, we actually have a little area that comes down where the growth hormone releasing hormone is going to enter into the blood, and this is going to be called the median eminence. Oh, you know what? Before we even get there, let's describe what we're looking at. This is the brain looking at it from the side. So if I were to draw an eye, right, there's an eye, it'd be looking that way. My optic chiasm would be right there. Back here I have the cerebellum, and then this is the brainstem, okay? This is going to be my posterior. This is going to be the posterior pituitary. Now, in real life, I actually kind of drew this really small and ugly. All right, and the reason being is we're not talking about it on this video. This right here is going to be my anterior pituitary gland, okay? This is my anterior pituitary, this is the posterior pituitary. We'll talk about this in other videos, and I've talked about it in past videos. So here's what's going to happen. We have our median eminence. If we look here, we actually have something that we call the hypophyseal portal system. And the hypophyseal portal system is basically made up of blood vessels, okay? I have one drawn here, there's actually going to be a lot of these. So what's going to happen is I have my internal carotid artery, and then I'm going to have my superior hypophyseal artery, and it's going to come to this, where this median eminence is, and it's going to have a capillary bed. So this is my capillary bed that's right here. And then what's going to happen is it's going to go into the hypophyseal portal vein, then it's going to go back into another capillary bed. So we call this the primary capillary plexus, the hypophyseal portal vein, and then the secondary the secondary capillary plexus. So primary capillary plexus, portal vein, and then secondary capillary plexus. Now, what's odd about this is we go from an artery to capillaries to a vein, but instead of staying in the vein, it goes back to capillaries. So my growth hormone is now going to come down, and it's going to enter into this system right here, okay? And what's going to happen is it is then going to come down to the anterior pituitary. Now, on the anterior pituitary, I am going to have a receptor. And if you recall, we call these the 7 transmembrane receptors. So there's my receptor. It goes over the membrane 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 times, right? And so my growth hormone is going to come down. It's going to activate this. Now, if you recall, then what's going to happen is I have something called a GS protein, G-stimulating protein. The G-stimulating protein is going to come over, and it is going to activate something called adenylate cyclase. Adenylate cyclase now is going to cause my ATP to be converted into cyclic AMP. All right, if you recall this, I actually have another video on this about the receptors of the endocrine system, but the cyclic AMP, now what that's going to do is it's going to go over to proteins that are on this membrane right here. Oh, by the way, this orange thing right here is a cell that's inside my anterior pituitary. So the orange is going to be what we call a somatotrope. So this is a somatotrope. And what somatotropes do is they're going to make and release growth hormone. So this is my somatotrope right here, okay? Like I said, we are going to have proteins on the membrane of my somatotrope, right? And they're going to be basically on ion channels. And what's going to happen is the cyclic AMP is going to phosphorylate these. So in other words, it's going to attach phosphates. When these attach phosphates, what's going to happen is I am going to have calcium start rushing into the somatotrope. Now on the inside of the somatotrope, I am going to have vesicles. And if you notice, the vesicles are the same color as the somatotrope cell membrane because vesicles are basically made up of the same thing that cell membranes are. And inside this vesicle, I am going to have growth hormone. Now, attached onto this vesicle and attached onto my somatotrope membrane, I am going to have proteins. And we are going to call these snare proteins. Okay, so we're going to have snare proteins. Okay? This calcium now is going to come and it's going to connect these snare proteins from the vesicle onto the cell membrane of the somatotrope. And what that will do is this will actually bond with the membrane, all right? But it's going to cause the release of growth hormone. Okay, that's the short-term effect of growth hormone releasing hormone. It's the fact that we're going to have this growth hormone secreted or released by the somatotrope. Okay, that's the short-term effect. The other effect what's going to happen is inside of here, we actually have DNA inside the nucleus, and my cyclic AMP is going to come down and it's going to bond with something that's called a transcription factor, right? And the transcription factor is basically going to go to a segment of this DNA, and it's going to cause this DNA to start undergoing protein synthesis, and then this is going to start making growth hormone. And then there'll be some finishing touches on it, and the growth hormone will be put inside a cell. This growth hormone is to replace the growth hormone that we just secreted, right? So this is the long-term effect. So what does growth hormone releasing hormone do? It's going to come down, it's going to cause the release of growth hormone into the bloodstream, and then it's going to activate the DNA and protein synthesis so we get more growth hormone. So let's talk about what's going to happen with this guy now. This growth hormone now is going to come and enter into the bloodstream. Okay, so now, this is GH, there's my growth hormone. I'm going to put growth hormone down here too. And two things are going to happen here. First, this is going to bond to a plasma protein. Okay, and this is going to be a weak bond. So this is a weak bond. Okay, and when I say it's a weak bond, this will last from several minutes to maybe a few hours. So this leaves the bloodstream pretty quickly, okay? But the other thing that's gonna happen, if you notice, we're going up this way and we're going down this way, because growth hormone can work in two different ways. So going this way, we're gonna call this direct action. Okay, this is direct action, and usually direct action is going to occur for growth hormone's role on metabolism, okay? So that's the direct action, it's going to go that way. If it goes this way, going this way, we're gonna call this indirect action. Indirect action, basically what's gonna happen is this is going to be used for growth. Okay, that's going to be used for growth. So now, I'm gonna move this over just a little bit, and let's take a look of the role these are going to play. So let's go to right about there, okay? So here's my growth hormone, again with the weak bonds, these won't stay very long. Up in here, I'm gonna have adipose tissue. So this is adipose tissue, all right, which contains lipids. And this is going to go through a process called lipolysis, which we're gonna explain right now. Okay, so it's gonna do lipolysis. All right, so here comes my growth hormone, and on this here, this is going to be basically an adipose cell, right? This is triglycerides in the middle, all right? So this is a triglyceride, and if you recall, triglycerides are basically 3 fatty acids attached to a glycerol molecule. So now what's going to happen is my growth hormone is going to come up here, and it's going to attach to a receptor that is going to be on this lipid molecule. So boom, right? And it's going to activate it. So now it's attached to the receptor, and what's going to happen is it's going to activate something inside of here. By the way, I'm making it look like there's just one glycerol in there or one triglyceride in there. There's many in there, okay? But for the most part, when the growth hormone attaches to this receptor, it's going to activate an enzyme called hormone-sensitive lipase. It's going to activate hormone-sensitive lipase. Now, here's what hormone-sensitive lipase is going to do. Hormone-sensitive lipase is going to cut these fatty acids from the glycerol, and then they're all going to come out into the bloodstream. So I'm going to put the glycerol right here, right? And then here's my fatty acids right here. So what's going to happen next? My fatty acids are going to enter the bloodstream, and what they're going to do is this is going to be a mitochondria, all right? And it's going to enter into the mitochondria. When it enters into the mitochondria, what's going to happen is it's going to undergo oxidation, and it's going to become an enzyme called acetyl coenzyme A, acetyl coenzyme A. Now you may recall the name acetyl coenzyme A because this is actually going to enter into the Krebs cycle. Okay, and then what's going to happen is it's going to play a role in making ATP, okay? So my fatty acids are going to go and they're going to enter, they're going to be oxidized to become acetyl coenzyme A, enter the Krebs cycle, and then it's going to go down electron transport chain and all that. And then we're going to have ATP. Okay, so what we're doing now is we're starting to make, we're starting to use fatty acids to make ATP. But let's look at some more of what's going on, and we're going to talk about the indirect action real quick, and then we're going to come back to the metabolism portion, okay? So if we look here, we have right here the liver. So this is going to be the liver right here. And what's going to happen is it's also going to have a receptor on it. Okay, it's also going to have a receptor. And on the receptor, on the inside of the receptor, we're going to have basically some amino acids attached to this. Okay, so these are amino acids here. If you can't read that, I'm just writing AA for amino acids. And now here comes my growth hormone, and now it's going to bond with this receptor right here. What's going to happen when it bonds with that receptor right there is I am going to have phosphorylation. So we are going to phosphorylate these amino acids. When we phosphorylate these amino acids, what's going to happen is we are going to get a type of enzyme which we call Janus kinase. Janus kinase. Janus kinase is also known as JAK for short, Janus kinase, right? So Janus kinase, what it's going to do now is it's going to come over and it's going to activate another enzyme which we are going to call STAT. Okay, STAT stands for signal transducer activator of transcription. Big long name. Signal transducer activator of transcription. And then what's going to happen is JAK is going to phosphorylate this. What the STAT's going to do now is the STAT is going to go up to the DNA and it's going to cause the DNA to do a type of protein synthesis in which it's going to make a new type of hormone that we are going to call IGF-1. Insulin-like growth factor 1. Insulin-like growth factor 1. Okay? So now, there's insulin-like growth factor 1. This is the indirect pathway, okay? So we're going to come back to this in just a minute. Before I do, I want to go through one thing real quick. Insulin-like growth factor 1 is going to bond to a plasma protein also, but in this case, this is going to be a strong bond. Okay, this will be a strong bond, and because that's a strong bond, this can stay on there for over a day. Okay, so over here we had the weak bond, over here we have the strong bond. This leaves the blood pretty quick. This is going to stay in the blood for a day or longer, right? So we have that. But the main thing is, if we go back to the direct action, we already talked about how we were making ATP from fatty acids. There's more that's going to happen. This is the glycerol, all right? So what's going to happen is this glycerol is going to come down and basically it's going to enter into the liver. So I'm just going to give it a shortcut here. It's going to enter into the liver. Now, besides doing this, the liver can also do something that's called gluconeogenesis. Gluconeogenesis. Now, gluconeogenesis is the making of glucose from non-carbohydrate sources. The making of glucose from non-carbohydrate sources. So in this case, it's going to be glycerol, right? It's going to be part of this triglyceride. So it's going to make glucose, right? So this is going to make glucose, and what's going to happen now is I am going to get some glucose building up in here. C6H12O6, there's glucose. So now I'm starting to make glucose from non-carbohydrate sources. Let's go back over here and look again. And this is going to be part of the direct action. This is indirect action. We're going to come back to this guy here. So if we look over here, this is going to be a muscle cell, right? And normally what happens is when we eat carbohydrates want to go into the muscle cells, right? So here comes my carbohydrate, C6H12O6, right? And when there's carbohydrates in the blood, what's going to happen is the pancreas is going to secrete insulin, right? The pancreas is going to secrete insulin. Well, in this case, what's going to happen is my growth hormone is going to block the carbohydrate from getting into the muscle cell, right? It's going to block the carbohydrate from getting into the muscle cell. It's going to basically, it's going to block the carbohydrate from getting into the muscle cell. Now, what's going to happen is the pancreas is going to respond by increasing the amount of insulin. As the pancreas increases the amount of insulin, the cells are going to become insulin resistant. Okay, they're going to become insulin resistant, right? So now, what's going to happen? As carbohydrates are in here, we're going to start to get more and more carbohydrates building up in the blood. The other thing that insulin usually does is it stops gluconeogenesis. But in this case, growth hormone is going to prevent insulin from stopping gluconeogenesis, okay? So because of that, we're gonna keep making more and more glucose because it's gonna continue to break down the fatty acids. So we're gonna start to have an increase of this in the blood also. So now I'm getting more and more glucose into the blood. More and more glucose into the blood, that's basically what happens in diabetes. So they say that this is diabetogenic, right? It's almost like what we have with diabetes. Another thing that's gonna happen is because we're not using glucose now for energy, right? We're not using glucose for energy. This is called the glucose sparing effect. Okay, the glucose sparing effect. Let me put a little bit more space there, okay? So now, glucose is gonna be there, it's gonna be building up. Insulin's gonna be continued to be secreted, which is going to make the cells more and more resistant to the insulin, all right? Let's take another look what's gonna happen now. We have this insulin growth factor here, right? And this insulin growth factor is gonna travel in the blood, and it's gonna go up to here, and this is going to be another muscle cell, right? So this is, remember I said M stands for muscle. So my insulin growth factor, my insulin-like growth factor 1 is going to enter into the muscle cell. And when it does, what it's going to do is it's going to open up channels which are going to allow amino acids to come in. But it's not only going to do that, it's going to also have it so that the DNA undergoes protein synthesis, right? So now I'm getting more amino acids coming in, and it's going to cause protein synthesis, it's going to increase transcription, it's going to increase translation, and overall, we're going to get an increase in proteins inside this muscle cell. Okay, so we get an increase of proteins inside the muscle cells. When we get an increase of proteins inside the muscle cell, it's going to increase the cell size, which is one of the things I said at the beginning it would do. Let's take a look at this real quick now. We are breaking down fatty acids to make ATP. We are not using glucose to make ATP because we're doing the fatty acids. But we're also taking amino acids and we're increasing the amount of protein. So really short, we're increasing the amount of protein and decreasing the amount of fatty acids, right? We're decreasing the amount of fatty acids because we're using those for ATP. We're increasing the amount of proteins. So another thing that growth hormone will do, it'll cause an increase in lean body mass. Okay, and again, this part here is part of the indirect action, right? That's part of the indirect action because we're getting an increase in the growth, right? Let's look at one more thing that growth hormone can do. So if we come over here, if I put this down right here, is this insulin-like growth factor can also go and it's going to cause an increase in a few things here. It's going to cause an increase in chondrocytes, right? And chondrocytes basically are responsible for making cartilage. It's going to cause an increase in osteoblasts. Osteoblasts are going to make bone. It's also going to cause an increase in proteins put into bone. An example would be cartilage or proteoglycans and things such as that. Okay, so let me draw a picture of my bone, and the first thing we're going to do is in endochondral growth, we are going to have basically proteins that are going to be put into here, onto the inside in here, okay? But the main thing that we're looking at here is if this is my bone, right, and this is the top of my bone, and then I have my epiphysis, right? And the chondrocytes are going to lay down cells in here, which are going to be cartilage. They're going to be making cartilage. Well, what's going to happen is growth hormone, or the insulin-like growth factor is going to change these chondrocytes and this cartilage into osteoblasts. There's their cell differentiation. Now, osteoblasts basically surround themselves with bone. So this is going to become bone. Well, after that becomes bone, what's going to happen is Insulin-like growth factor is going to cause these chondrocytes to multiply again and increase in size. So if I go like this, now, right? And then like this, I get more chondrocytes in there, right? And then what's going to happen is these are going to be differentiated into osteoblasts, and osteoblasts surround themselves with bone. So now we have more bone. Then what's going to happen? Same thing's going to happen again, all right? And like this, and now I'm going to get my chondrocytes in here. Okay, and then, so there's chondrocytes again, right? My insulin-like growth factor caused more chondrocytes to be made. These are going to turn into osteoblasts, and then what's going to happen is these are going to become bone again. This is going to continue going both ways. Okay, it's going to continue going both ways, and a person is going to grow. Eventually what's going to happen is we're going to stop making the chondrocytes, and when that happens, what's going to happen is this will all turn into bone, all right? And then we're done growing. Let's look at another thing that's going to happen. I'm going to take this bone here, I'm going to pull it out, and then I'm going to turn it this way, okay? When I turn it this way, now we're looking down at the bone from above, right? We're looking down the angle of the bone. Going around the bone, I am going to have osteoblasts. Usually osteoblasts are going to be in the periosteum, or the outer surrounding of the bone. Then what's going to happen is they're going to multiply and make more bone. Now normally what happens is you have another cell that's called an osteoclast, and the osteoclast is going to basically reabsorb some of that inside bone. Then my osteoblasts are going to do it again, right? They're going to make more bone going around here, right? And then my osteoclast should take away some more of the inside. That's the way it should work. But now, if my osteoblast lay down bone faster than the osteoclast, basically the bones become thicker. Okay, the bone's going to become thicker, because now I'll still have this whole inside here, or a lot of it, right? So the bones become thicker. This is especially true in membranous bones, or bones that grow membranous, like the jaw, the eyes. And that's why sometimes as people get older, they get those thick jaw lines, or those thick jaws, or the eyebrows, you know, the frontal bone above the eyes becomes thick. So now, that's growth hormone and growth hormone releasing hormone and insulin-like growth factor 1. So now, let's talk about what stops growth hormone, okay? So what's going to decrease the amount of growth hormones? Well, there's going to be two different factors, okay? One's going to be a negative feedback loop. So what's going to happen is if we get an increase of growth factor in the blood, that's actually going to stop growth hormone from being secreted. The other one's going to be hyperglycemia. Okay, so hyperglycemia can also stop the amount of growth hormone that's being released into the blood. We have obesity. This will also decrease the amount of growth hormone being released into the blood. And there's also old age. As we get older, we secrete less growth hormone, right? Another factor that's going to come into play is another hormone. And this hormone is going to be called growth hormone inhibiting hormone, right? Growth hormone inhibiting hormone. And this is actually going to be released by the periventricular nucleus. Okay, the periventricular nucleus, right? And so that'd be growth hormone inhibiting hormone. They're going to stop growth hormone from being secreted also. So that's it for growth hormone. Like we said, there is a lot that has to do with growth hormone. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, please hit the like and subscribe button. And I'm going to move this camera just a little bit so you guys can actually take a look, maybe a better view of what we went over. Let's go over this way just a little bit. And thanks for watching.